Quite interesting phones there. Well, to our first conversation now. So determined to address inadequate foreign exchange supply in the economy, the Central Bank of Nigeria has announced an initiative named Race to $200 billion in FX repatriation program to stimulate non-oil exports. For analysis, we have Ayode Jebo, Head Retails Investment at Chapel Hill, Denham, to drill down on this initiative. Great to have you. Good morning.
Good morning, Ladi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. Happy Valentine. Well, the CBN last week announced the launch of the RT200 FX program, in a bid to get about $200 billion in FX repatriation. Please, can I have your thoughts on this? Quite a lofty ambition there.
Thanks. I think it's very laudable and really a bold step, which is really very critical into the development and in also solving our FX problem. The only, I think, concern that I have is that this would have also been integrated to the National Development Plan, because the fiscal authorities also have a major role to play in making this a success. This, the race to the $200 billion $200 billion within the next 3 to 5 years would really solve our problem and create a lot of stability in the FX market, because there will be significant liquidity, and we will not be surprised to see significant appreciation in the FX if this is achieved. Even if 50% achievement, we would see that improvement in the FX market. So what the CBN is trying to do is to look at the non-oil export sector. We know we have depended significantly on proceeds from oil, and most times once it dries up, it impacts on the ability of the CBN to fund and supply the FX dollars, which we saw happened in 2020 as a result of COVID. So what the CBN is basically trying to do is, how can we diversify away from oil? How can we create and improve FX proceeds from the non-oil sector? So I think it's really a laudable idea, and it's good that we're beginning to see that step that is being taken in solving our long-dated problem of FX.
All right, and talking about oil, we're seeing oil hit new highs, this morning, but we're not taking advantage of those prices. But what are the major key anchors, of this program?
Okay, thanks. And speaking regarding the oil market, we're all aware that there are still a lot of challenges in terms of production. So when you look at, as of December, our current production was around, average production rather, was around 2.1 million barrels per day. And you check the OPEC quota that we have, I think is about 2. We're producing about 1.2 million barrels per day, and the OPEC quota was about 1.6 billion barrels per day. So we are not really benefiting from this high crude oil prices. And speaking on the anchors for this race to $200 billion by the CBN, one of the first anchor is I would say the value-adding export facility. And what the CBN is basically trying to do is that they will provide long-term concessionary loans to companies that are willing to add value to what they export. So based on data that about 700,000 metric tons of cashew, cocoa, and the sesame seeds is being exported, and I think it's just about maybe 5% that is consumed locally. And when you look at out of what is exported, just about 16% that is processed. And you really don't get a lot of value when you don't process before you export. So CBN would be willing to support with funding to companies that are willing to add value to some of these processes. You see, like the cocoa, for instance, rather than exporting cocoa, you may want to start exporting a bit of processed or chocolates rather than exporting the raw materials. Secondly, the CBN will also be focusing on the non-oil commodities expansion facility. So this basically would focus more on local production of non-oil export items. So CBN is trying to see how we want to be producing, how we want to encourage companies rather to produce so these items and export them, which will create jobs, would also increase our productivity, and may also provide a bit of feedstock for the value adding exporting facilities. The third one, which the CBN is taking from the current naira for dollar policy, is the non-oil FX rebate scheme, which basically encourages exporters of non-oil products to repatriate their proceeds and sell to the investors and exporters window. So there will be a bit of rebate. If you recall that there's the naira for dollar, where paid for every dollar that comes in, CBN pays, I think is it about 4 naira, if I can recall correctly now. And that has increased the amount of weekly repatriation. I think based on CBN data is from about $6 million weekly to about $100 million weekly. So CBN is borrowing a leaf from that. And there's also the dedicated non-oil export terminal, which I feel is also very important. We know that the Tinkan, our Papa port, is always very congested, and in exporting, you have a lot of items gets damaged and their quality reduced before they are taken out of the country. So CBN is trying to fund for those that will have willing to take that bold step and invest within that space. They will be willing to provide facility to support, so that based on Financial Times story, I think in December, that states that to import from China to Nigeria, it costs, I think, about $3,500, which is about 22,000 kilometers. And looking at it from the Apapa port to the mainland, which is or to the island rather, which is about 12 kilometers, it costs about $4,000. So you can see that high cost. And lastly, to just wrap up, is that there will also be like a summit, a training program where people can exhibit and where people can also borrow ideas and learn from each other. So I would say, in wrapping up on this, is that it's really a laudable step, but there's the need to see how this can be synchronized with the fiscal authorities, with how it can also be synchronized with the national development plan, so that some other incentives in terms of infrastructure that may need to be.
All right, Mr. Ebo. Seems we're having a little issue with the audio there. Can you hear me? Hello, Mr. Ebo.
I can hear you.
Okay. The audio, I think your audio connection is a little distorted there. Maybe you can check your audio. But while you're checking that, you did mention the Naira for dollar scheme, of the CBN. Do you think any significant achievement has been made with that?
Yes, I think based on the data, there's been significant achievement. So what the CBN has published is that the repatriation weekly has increased from about $6 million per week to over $100 million per week. And that's really laudable. And I feel that's part of why the CBN is also anchoring that to part of its raise to the $200 billion for non-oil exporters. So for non-oil exporters would be if they repatriate and sell their export proceeds at the investors and exporters window, there will be a bit of concession that will be given to them.
All right, now let's talk about the proposed stoppage of sale of dollars to banks. Still supposed to be an hypothetical situation there. How does this come as a shock to you? And why do you think the CBN is thinking about that route?
Okay, thanks. And it was a shock to us. And but I think the CBN has also clarified that they don't have any intention to stop the sale of FX to the banks. So what
Right.
basically the CBN was trying to also say is that while they are also trying to support the non-oil export companies, that they want to persuade banks to also try to support and provide credit facility to these companies so that the export proceeds that comes from companies they've supported, they can also use it as an avenue to also support demand for FX. So not depending solely on the CBN for FX, that they can, if they support group of companies, if those companies earn FX and they route it through their banks, they may have sufficient FX to also supply the demand that they are receiving from their customers. So I agree with the CBN, but this is going to be like a medium to a long term plan. Once some of these policies that the CBN is putting in place have begun to yield significant result, then CBN may begin to reduce the sale of FX, encouraging banks to also provide that support. But I would say that the fiscal authority needs to de-risk this. What are the incentives they are also providing? Will there be tax-free um, incentive for companies that are focused in this area? So I think by the time the fiscal authority and the monetary authority, they also try to synchronize this laudable idea. I believe that it is doable, and if there's that willpower to also ensure that it's implemented, we believe that we would see that positive result, and it's going to be very positive for the economy because we depend a lot on FX, especially importation of imported items.
Right, and we can see that FPI has been drying up in the past few years. What do you think the CBN can do to review this? And what is the likely impact of the expected hike in interest rates? The developed climes.
Okay, this is a two-in-one question. So starting with the foreign portfolio investors that have been drying up, I think it's a chicken and egg situation. So for CBN to be able to attract the FPIs, they need to increase the interest rate environment, make it more attractive. I know there's a bit of confidence issue that we've had since 2020, in 2020 when we had that um, dry up in FX supply. So that impacted on the ability of the foreign investors to repatriate. As a result, they reduced the inflow into the economy, and that impacted on the liquidity. So, there needs to be a restoration of confidence. The CBN would have to increase the rate on, especially the OMO rates, where most of the FPIs are also allowed to participate. But that also have that impact on general interest rates. CBN have been using OMO to guide interest rate in the past few years, and if we have significant raise to the interest rate, it would impact on ability of even some of the companies to also raise commercial paper to fund their businesses. So I know there will be a bit of balancing here. Investors are also clamoring. There's the negative, what we call the negative return when inflation rate is higher than the income you earn from your investment. But the overall objective has to be what benefits the overall economy the most. If we're able to grow the economy at lower interest rates in terms of lending rates, that will really impact and increase productivity, and Nigerians will have more money to spend and will not be too concerned about that. Inflation rate will drop and that negative return would decline. And I think lastly, I missed the one on the raise in the hike by the developed countries.
Yeah.
So what typically would happen is that will further reduce the FPI flows to Nigeria. And if we have to attract them, we'll have to raise our interest rates. Most of the FPIs have exited the country. So I know the CBN is really not concerned if they would see a major outflow again if the Fed, I think from March, we expect that they should begin to raise rates for this year.
All right, Mr. Ebo, but before I let you go now, I know the CBN rolled out the first list of the 100 for 100 policy on production and productivity. What's your view about this initiative?
I think it's a positive one. The first batch has been, I think, was published, I think, last week, where about 23 billion naira was disbursed of about 100 companies, and the focus companies are companies that have major impact in terms of improving productivity in the non-oil sector. So it still ties down to how we want to diversify away from oil and also increase the economy, companies that will generate employment and will also add value and build sustainability. Some of the sectors are great, health, some of those major sectors that the CBN is looking at. What I would just may also recommend is that there's been a lot of intervention loans that have been given. If it's also possible to be getting like a report, like the banks, you see what's the non-performing loan, what's the payback ratio. So there's been a lot of intervention funds from the CBN that's gone out. It's also good to also have to provide a bit of transparency to Nigerians, to also have let's know what's not performing, what's the total loans. So let there be that statement that shows what actually is happening within that space, so that we can also see how it's been impacting on the growth of the economy and also on the balance sheet of the CBN.
All right, Mr. Yodejebo, head retail investment at Chapel Denham. Thank you so much for your thoughts today.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, so after the break, we look at Nigeria's quick service restaurant industry. That's in a moment. Do stay with us. This is Business One.